My Experiences with Ghosts by Beatrix. I want to share some experiences with ghosts and the paranormal with you that I've had. I was raised in a moderately religious home. My family is Lutheran, and although I was never much of a believer, I am very spiritual. I've always been, I suppose you could say, sensitive to spirits, and I can sense them and see them in my mind's eye. The first story happened when I was somewhere around 14 years old. At the time, me and my sisters and my dad were staying at my grandpa's house. My grandpa's house is an old farmhouse that is roughly around 100 years old, and at the time my sisters and I were staying in our grandpa's trophy room. For those who do not know, a trophy room is a big game hunter's dream. It's like my grandpa's trophy case, where all of the stuff like trophies, heads, and animals are displayed. My grandpa's trophy room is vast and about 2 stories and a field floor to ceiling with trophies. Bison, deer, big cats, bears, zebra, wolves. It's honestly insane. If it's huntable, it's probably in this room. And you might think that sleeping in this room with all these animals, these dark, lifeless eyes looking at you in the giant windows at night would be creepy. And you're right, it was. But this room was a newer addition, especially compared to the rest of the house. However, after a while, we moved to sleep in the upstairs bedroom, and you might think that this would be preferable. However, I can safely say I slept far better in the trophy room than I ever did upstairs. Now, my room was at the end of this hallway towards my grandpa's room, and it was small and more isolated from the other rooms my sisters were staying in, and I often felt not alone, if you know what I mean. Even during the day, if I were alone in the house, I always felt like someone was right beside me or just outside the room. I swear I would hear bumps and noises. I know it was an old house, and there were probably some mice or creaking pipes, but still it was hard to explain because I usually felt like I was being watched intently, especially in the old parts of the house. This feeling never followed to the newer features of the place though, like the trophy room or the kitchen. I never saw anything or anyone, and neither did my sisters. Still, eventually, we all got so creeped out by this energy and this feeling that we all ended up sleeping together in one room. After some time, my dad got a new job and we didn't have to stay with my grandparents anymore. Still, I would continue to work for him over the summers during my teens and stay there. I would work alone, painting windows, barn doors, decks, or ground maintenance, like grass keeping and stuff like that. I would usually feel watched, like someone was in the window just watching me work, and it never felt friendly, just like it had felt when I stayed there when I was younger. It was a heavy, oppressive feeling, like you were trespassing. Anyways, at some point during those years, I found out from my dad the original family who had built the farmhouse, the father, was buried on that land somewhere. So I believe this farmer was watching me and still is in that house. Even when I visit my grandparents' house to this day, I wouldn't say I like to go upstairs alone. And there are certain parts of the house, especially the basement, which is a dirt floor in some regions, that feel almost evil and certainly unwelcome. That heavy, oppressive feeling is still there and probably always will be. My Friend Miv by Anonymous. I've always wanted to share this story. I've heard many paranormal stories and there's always a little voice of doubt in terms of the storyteller's authenticity. But while these events didn't happen to me, they did happen to someone I was very close with, and contain a few elements of corroboration. It's important for me to get a feeling for honesty when listening to a story that defies scientific belief. So, for what it's worth, this is an honest account. First, a little backstory. Miv was a fascinating woman. She was one of my best friends, which is a little odd because I met her when I was about 18 years old, and she was in her middle ages. I was a young guy into motorcycles and rock music. I played guitar and was into horror movies and working out. As a contrast, she was short, dumpy, had thin greasy hair, a walking stick, and wore thick bottle-rimmed glasses. She was never without a cigarette in her hand, and her ashtray was always full. However, she was an unbelievable, astute, and wise woman, to the point where she was like a wise old oracle to me and my hippie friends. There was never a personal problem she could not fix with a few gentle words. I would often go to her tall, slightly creepy Victorian terrace house, and we would sit in her favorite room and chat philosophically. The air full of smoke and surrounded by dusty antiques and the odd stuffed bird. Her husband was, by all accounts, a wretched man. His nickname, by all, was the Wizard. Their house was pretty much all wood floors, narrow but tall. He wore an orthopedic shoe, known colloquially as a club foot. You'd hear him coming and clomping down the wood stairs from a mile away. As his nickname suggested, he had long gray hair and a little goatee that resembled a stereotypical devil. He always wore a gray suit and had wild, staring eyes. He didn't seem altogether and right in his mind. That was apparent during any conversation you would have with him. I don't mean he was like crazy, more like he was old, significantly older than Miv, and his mind was just a little aged. When he was younger, he also gained a reputation for black magic. One brief account I heard was that there was a black magic circle known for their dark deeds, something like the Golden Dawn or something like that. Well, they wouldn't let him join because he was too dark. Suffice to say, he was probably into summoning things. Anyway, over the years before Miv died, we became very close, and I heard all kind of cool stories. The story I'm about to recount is, I guess, not so cool. At least not for her. But it's an interesting one. Years ago, when she and her husband were living in South Wales in the UK, they lived in a similar house to the one that I knew that she lived in. A tall, slightly spooky, aren't they all, Victorian terrace house. These houses were usually 3 stories, maybe a basement. I've lived in one myself, and they're inherently spooky, which kind of sets the tone. At the time, Miv and the Wizard had just had their first child, who would grow up to become one of my best friends about 24 years later. She had also, not too terribly long ago, come out of a brief stint in a nun's convent, so she was very religious. With that came certain beliefs and attitudes which would soon be very much tested to breaking points. I'm not able to be exact with the timeline here, but Miv told me that she started hearing voices, distant at first, in the house, when no one was around. As if often the case in many of these stories, she shrugged it off and ignored it as best she could. But then the voices started to address her directly. Now at this stage, she recalls being very worried that she was in fact unwell, and her biggest fear was that her son would get taken away from her due to her inability to take care of him. So she told no one. The voices got worse and eventually would start saying things like, "We're going to drive you mad," and she would say things like that, and so forth. If that wasn't enough, though, she would soon start to see a dark, shadowy figure at the top of the stairs. She told me that it would always appear in such a way that as you turned to look to see if there was something there, you'd almost stumble at the top of these steps and fall to your death. Still, she refused to talk about it. In her mind, and with her religious beliefs, there was no room for ghosts to exist, so it was a subjective phenomenon, and she was indeed losing her marbles. In this house, they had a cleaner. The cleaner would always leave the front door wide open when she was cleaning the stairs and the hall. Miv assumed it was to get fresh air, maybe to help dry the floor. One day, when it was cold, Miv questioned her, "Why do you keep that door open? It's so cold." Her response changed Miv's life at this point. She said, "It's so if that dark thing at the top of the stairs comes for me, I can get out of here right quickly." Again, bear in mind that Miv had not told anyone about this phenomenon. One day, she had a friend over. The friend was a big, burly, tough woman who stood no nonsense. She didn't believe in any of this supernatural rubbish and was not afraid of ghosts. After sitting in their living room and this lady giving Miv something of telling her off for being so silly and superstitious, the lady got up to go to the bathroom. She came back a moment later, her face white. "You okay?" said Miv. "Can you come with me?" replied the lady. "Because you don't know where the bathroom is?" "No, because I'm not going up there on my own with that dark shadow." Another story shared with me was that Miv was bathing her son in the upstairs bathroom when someone knocked on the front door to the house. She yelled down to them, and it turned out to be a friend, so she shouted for him to come up and that she was in the bathroom. She heard him walk up the stairs. He then suddenly broke into a sprint, came running into the bathroom, threw his arms around Miv, and clung to her like a baby, terrified of what he had just seen. Eventually, it all came to a head when this entity started to entice her into something more sinister. She recalls hearing the voices beckoning her upstairs to the dark top floor bedroom. The weird thing here, and what's hard to explain, if only because I don't quite understand it, is that she felt compelled to obey. It got her up the stairs. She would stop. She would resist, and it would gently insist that she continues upward. And again, she would obey against her will. This happened all the way until she got to the bedroom with the lights out. If I recall correctly, the thing asked her to turn the lights out, and she at first said no. But again, it insisted. This is crazy, I know. It eventually got her to lie down on the bed. Laying there in the dark, she then described how this entity began to assert itself onto and into her body. She described it like assault, but through her pores, if that makes any sense. She began an internal struggle at this stage, and in that struggle was able to draw some willpower to call out the name of Jesus or something like that. I forgot whether she said a small prayer, but some form of religious statement, and the thing went away instantly. I'm sure there are many other anecdotes. The other friends in our circle know of these stories too and have probably heard their own tales. So I may be missing a few key pieces. All I know is that they shortly moved out of that house. Now, one thing that does stand out as interesting, after discussing the story with a mutual friend who knew Miv for years before I met her, he told me that she'd also said this to him, but around that time that they left the house for good, she saw the wizard kneeling and burying something, and it was thought that he was doing something. Whatever he was doing, though, resembled a closing ceremony for when someone summons a demon. I know some of this won't make any sense, and I don't really expect it to. Why would you stay married to someone that evil, though? I asked myself that question. In fact, you know something? I asked her that same question at least once. She took a long drag on her cigarette, gave a long, slow shrug as she exhaled, and said something about feeling sorry for him. The whole dynamic will have me scratching my head. Miv was incredibly wise in some ways, and yet nonsensical in other ways, but there seemed to be more to that family story than meets the eye. Eventually they would have a daughter, who was born physically and mentally disabled. The daughter is only surviving family of the member now. My friend, her son, died of cancer about 7 years after I met both him and his mother. The wizard died around that same time too, and Miv, heartbroken over the death of her son, died just 2 years after we buried him. She used to say, "When I die, I'm going to haunt you," in her usual playful way. Eyes twinkling, taking a drag of a cigarette. She meant to come back and give me a clue about the other side. After attending her son's funeral, I was walking on the waterfront of my hometown. I was thinking about them both, and I felt tearful. I sat on the sea wall and spoke to her. I asked her why she didn't come to me to show me any evidence of the other side. I concluded, well, maybe she tried, but I can't see it. Maybe I can only see what I can only see. I stood up to walk away, and something compelled me, I don't know what or why, to look down where I was sitting. There, etched into the very slab of concrete I was sitting on, was the first, initial, and the last name of her son, who we had buried 2 days before. Small Town Haunting by Lynn. Dear Swamp Dweller, I've been listening to your stories for a while. I finally got the courage to share my own. Mind you, the story at the beginning will be a bit hazy, as it happened to me when I was 5. But as my story goes on, because it continued until I was 22, it will become much clearer. When I was growing up, I lived in a small town in Ohio. To protect my family and friends, their names will be changed. Now, I have an older sister who I will call Lucy. We live in a small trailer outside of a small town, literally in the middle of nowhere. It would take us 20 minutes to get to any major stores. One night, My sister Lucy was inviting her friend, who I will call Jessie, over to spend the night and have a sleepover. At the time, me and my sister had shared a room. Jessie was one of my sister's odd friends. She was gothic and into creepy stuff. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but I was just kind of off-put by it at the time. So she had brought over a Ouija board. Me being 5 years old, not understanding the significance of it, I thought it was just some kind of board game. Well, later that night, I want to say sometime around midnight, my sister Lucy and her friend Jessie pulled out the Ouija board and told me to go to bed, after putting a ring of salt around my bed and around them, saying it would protect us. Well, being a little kid, I wanted to see what the big kids were doing. They turned off all the lights and lit a couple of candles. Both sat cross-legged on the floor with their hands on the indicator. Now, I'm not really sure what it's called. Then, they started asking questions. Within a few minutes, they started receiving answers. Both did the normal reaction, which was, "Did you move it?" And they kept blaming each other. After a few minutes, they realized that neither one of them were doing it, and there was an outside force moving it. At one point, whatever was doing it asked them to both lay on the floor. I remember this very clearly. Maybe about 5 to 10 seconds after they laid on the floor, I saw a red orb and white orb enter the room. I was so confused. I had no idea what was going on. Then, as I watched from my bed, I saw the red orb enter my sister, and the white orb enter Jessie. For a few moments, nothing happened. Neither one of them moved. Then it was like all hell broke loose. Dark shadow figures swarmed over me in my bed. I started to scream. My mother heard all the commotion, and when she came in, I was being lifted off the bed by my hair. My sister and her friend were stuck to the floor and could not move. My mother started chanting something. I couldn't for the life of me tell you what it was that she said. But whatever it was, it worked. I felt my bed and my sister and her friend both sat at the same time. My mother looked at them and then looked at me. She saw the Ouija board on the floor and asked my sister and her friend what they had done. When neither one of them would answer, she asked me. I told her what I saw and what had happened. My mother was angry at my sister and her friend. She took the Ouija board away and went outside to burn it. As I would later learn, that is not the thing to do. For 10 years after that, nothing happened. My parents had bought a double-wide trailer and put in a basement foundation to make it look like a real home. When building all of this, we had a lot of problems. The biggest problem that I could remember when we were doing the basement foundation, in the back wall of the foundation, it fell in. We chalked it up to nothing but natural occurrences, but it kept happening, and it was a pain in the butt to get it to stay up. I don't even remember what they ended up doing to make sure it didn't happen again. The year I turned 15, my mother had gone to an antique store and bought an antique mirror. She hung it above a 55-gallon aquarium. One day, me, my sister, and my mother were sitting in the dining room. We were all talking about mundane things about our lives. All of a sudden, we heard something running through the house, and then a child's laughter, and then my bedroom door slam. Me and my mother and my sister both looked at each other in shock and horror. We had no idea what had just happened. Things continued to get worse from there. There was one morning during the summer I had woken up late from staying up all night. My mother had been working a 70-hour work week and had the day off, so she was sleeping in too. When I walked out into the kitchen, I screamed because all the cabinet doors were open and all the dishes were stacked on the counters. It was insane, because there was like canned vegetables on top of them, balanced in ways that were just not natural. This was stacked in a way that would be extremely odd for any human being to do. When my mother heard the scream, she came out of her bedroom and saw what had happened. She had started to put the pieces together, so she did her best to seek help. She talked to my father about it. My father was a skeptic and he had never really, witnessed any of these events, so I don't really think he believed in any such thing. This ends up in an argument between the two of them. Eventually, my mother just waited until he was away for work to go to a Wicca priestess to ask for help. The priestess gave her things to bless the house with. She sent me away to one of my friends, and called my sister over who had moved out a while back for some help. I do not know the events that occurred that night. I do not know what really went down, but for at least a year things were okay after that. Until one night, I was in the living room. The way our living room was set up was that we had one large couch, which was set up against the window, next to an end table. On the other end was another end table and a love seat, so it was shaped like an L, with the coffee table in the middle. Next to the other end table, at the end of the large couch, was the TV stand. We also had a fireplace in the living room, which was across from the large couch directly opposite. It was a weekend, and I was working on a project for school. My parents were out grocery shopping, so I sat at the coffee table on the floor, working on my project while watching TV with my back to the fireplace. Suddenly, I got the strange feeling like something was watching me. I started looking around, and then I looked at the fireplace. I noticed movement in the fireplace. As I kept on looking at the fireplace intently, I noticed a face. Whatever this thing was, had scraggly hair with cat-like eyes that were green in the most demonic smile I could ever imagine. It had what looked like alligator teeth. I was so entranced by it, I kept on staring at it, and then I decided to draw it. It moved its head back and forth, and finally, it said something to me. It said,
"I've been with you for many years, and I will never leave. Even when you think I'm gone, I'll still be there."
At this point, being scared out of my mind, I ran to grab my house phone and called my mother and told her she needed to get home now. When her and my father got home, they asked me what I was doing in their bedroom. They could see me from the window while they were driving up the driveway. I told them I hadn't even left the living room. I was too scared to move. My parents did not believe me because my mother got upset and told me I shouldn't be telling stories. 2 weeks after this event was when things really got bad. My father was away on work again. Me and my mother were sitting in the living room watching TV together. As we were watching TV, we started hearing bangs on our front door. My mother went to check on what it was, and there was no one there. She sat back down and started watching TV with me again. Then we heard footsteps running across the house from my bedroom to their bedroom and the door slamming. The laughter of a child followed it again. Me and my mother both looked shocked to each other. The cabinet doors in the kitchen all started opening and closing and banging hard like somebody was angry. The mirror above the fish tank started vibrating and banging off the wall. At this moment, me and my mother both stood up and ran for her bedroom. She went to her side table and pulled out sage candles and the Bible. She lit the candles and the sage and started repeating a verse from the Bible. I started to become angry and felt sick all of a sudden. After about 20 minutes of her just repeating the verses, everything stopped. She asked me if I was okay, to which I replied I did not feel very well. She put her hand on my forehead and realized I was burning up. A few hours later, after we cleaned up everything, I felt fine. The fever was gone. Many years later, I'd entered a bad relationship. When I was around 22, me and my ex decided to go on a night drive. It'd been raining for quite a few days, and we wanted to get out of the house. We were coming down a steep hill, and all of a sudden, something was before us. When I say something, I knew exactly what it was. It was the same scraggly figure I had seen in my fireplace all those years ago. But this time it had a body, and it was about 6 foot tall, and it had long claws for hands. My ex slammed on the brakes to try to avoid it, and we swerved past it. It reached out towards the car, trying to scratch out at us. Our tires blew out, and he started swerving uncontrollably down a hill with a curved bottom with an embankment. We went over the embankment, and we landed on a bush, allowing us to land softly, luckily. My ex had hit his head on the window on the driver's side. I had been wearing my seatbelt and was not injured too bad. He was unconscious for roughly 5 minutes. Well, I was trying to get out of the car to get help. We landed on the opposite side, so the only way out of the car was through my door on the passenger side. When he finally came to, he helps me open the passenger door and climb out. Mind you, in this moment we were both in shock. He decided he was going to walk back to his house and pull the car out with his truck. He told me to stay there and wait. As I did, the figure appeared again, this time within 10 feet of me. It spoke without moving its mouth with that same demonic smile. I believe it was trying to say something to me, but I couldn't decipher it this time. My ex started coming down the hill with his truck. When the light hit the figure, it disappeared. I didn't tell him what happened. I was too scared and I thought I was still in shock. A few months later, me and him broke up. I have not seen him since, although I have heard about him, and things in his life have gone bad. I don't know if it was the creature's doing or if it was just karma. I do know when I speak about these events that they send chills down my spine. I have not seen the figure since that day. I pray that I never will again. I don't know if it came from the Ouija board or not, but I refuse to have one in my home or around me. Sorry this was long-winded, but this really did happen. I hope you decide to share this on your show. I love listening to your stories and hope you continue with it. Traumatic Events I Can't Quite Explain by Yumi L. So this happened quite a few years back. I was a recent graduate, working as a low-paid radio presenter on the local television, dating a man much older than me, Jordan, a renowned artist and writer. Our relationship was never as close as I would have wanted it to be. The excuse of work and other personal issues would have always stood in the way. His mom had recently suffered a stroke, so we were all busy tending to her in some way, even though she was extraordinarily headstrong and independent. A professional stylist would come over to her apartment every week, fix her hair, paint her nails, etc. Despite her slight immobilization and health conditions, she was adamant about maintaining her physical appearance. I often visited her, and we talked over coffee and countless cigarettes. One day I stayed the night with my boyfriend. I was busy making breakfast for us all the following day. His mother was still in bed sleeping longer than usual. Jordan decided if it was time to wake her up since the food was almost ready. He entered her room only to exit almost immediately, swiftly walking over to me, where I saw what had just occurred. Confused, I asked what was going on, and in a calm voice he quickly said, "Go home, she's gone. I don't want you to see this." I immediately knew what had happened and grabbed my coat to leave. The next few days were a blur for us all. I was called over for a final open casket viewing before they transported her body to a nearby city where she was to be cremated then buried. As soon as it started, it was all over and calm again. The funeral was over and Jordan was now home. I went over to his apartment to spend some time with him and comfort him. Our close friend had traveled to pay her respect, and we invited her to stay the night before she traveled back the following day. I was pacing the living room up and down, suddenly feeling emotions welling up in me stronger than I was ready for. I looked up at the grandfather clock sitting against a wall when I noticed the arrows going backward, then forward again, in a systematic pattern. I stayed transfixed on it for quite a few seconds, not quite believing what I had seen. When I finally snapped out of it and decided to check the clock for some sort of issue, and check the other clocks in the room to make sure I wasn't going crazy, I hadn't even thought to turn the lights on. So it took me a second to focus my eyes, but when I did, I was not even surprised to see the clocks in the room were all acting up at the same time. A happy, sad feeling washed over me, and I shouted for Jordan and our friend to come see. They were just as surprised as I was, but no one seemed afraid. We all just kind of smiled knowingly. Even in the so-called afterlife, his mother kept her sense of humor alive. Eventually, we quieted down and sat on the living room sofa to watch TV before bed. It was around 11 p.m. when the screen unexpectedly turned to static. My boyfriend stood up, almost likely to go slam his hand on the TV in an attempt to fix it, when the sudden static turned to a complete black screen with a message in the corner saying "Sleep 3. Jordan stood in the complete dark room, shocked, looking at this TV, a few steps away from it. His hand was around his waist, staring down at the screen. The message soon disappeared, turning back to static. We all let out a small chuckle, and then promptly turned off the TV, listening to the news. We all made our way to bed. Nobody was alarmed, really, but we were all kind of freaked out. It was definitely unsettling, but we'd like to think it was just a way for his mom to say goodbye. My Aunt's Spooky House by Anonymous. I have an aunt that lives in a haunted house. The house was built in the late 1800s. The house has a weird setup. It is technically two separate identical houses conjoined as one big house. According to my mom, the house was owned by two women that were twins, with each twin living on their own side, and each side connecting through a staircase in the attic. Legend has it that the twins had an uncle that did bad things to them, that ended in one of the twins getting pregnant and having a baby. The other twin smothered the baby, ending in both twins committing suicide. Weirdly, almost every family member that has ever had the misfortune of sleeping over at that house has left with a story to tell. To my own dismay, I have, on 2 different occasions, experienced something here. The summer after I graduated 8th grade, my older cousin was getting married out of state. Not all of our family from our state could go, so just me and my aunt went. We had a very early flight to catch, so she figured it would be better if I spent the night at her house. I asked if I could sleep in her room. When she asked why, I was direct and told her because the house was haunted. As usual, she shrugged it off and angrily disputed that there were no ghosts. She said, "If it will make you feel a little bit better, you can stay in my room." As night drew near, I went to the bathroom, to the medicine cabinet, and took sleep medicine, in hopes it would make me fall asleep before my aunt. Sure enough, it didn't. My aunt dozed off and I lay wide awake and scared, occasionally switching my eyes from looking at the TV to glance at the hallway through the open door. A couple of hours passed and nothing happened. I started to let my guard down and relax just a little bit. I got a little more comfortable in the bed and, out of nowhere, the closet doorknob started to frantically rotate, as if someone was trying to get out. I immediately sat up, wide awake and in panic mode. The remaining hours of the night I stayed awake in fear, watching the closet door, not sure who or what was trying to open it, but to this day, I'm happy it never did. Years later, the summer after I graduated college, I spent the night over at her house again. Like the previous time, we were traveling out of town the next day, and my aunt figured it would be better if I spent the night at her house, so we could catch an early flight the next morning. I unhappily obliged. As we retired for the night, I headed to the room where I would be sleeping. It was the room down the hall from my aunt's. I closed the door, put on my PJs, and sat down on the recliner in front of the TV. I had already mentally prepared myself and had expected to stay awake the entire night. The beginning of the night, I browsed the web on my phone to pass some time. A couple of hours passed and nothing was happening. So, as soon as the clock approached 3 a.m., I began to hear what sounded like heeled shoes walking. Whatever it was walked up the stairs, down the hall, and stopped right outside the room I was in. I immediately jumped up, went to the heavy daybed in the room and pushed it in front of the door to prevent whatever it was from opening the door. The walking continued. Again and again. It would start from the base of the stairs and go up the stairs and down the hall, each time stopping right outside the door of the room I was in. Despite barricading the door closed, I was still scared. To lighten up the tense atmosphere, I turned on a channel that had some stand-up comedy and tried to watch that, but I was still terrified. The walking persisted for about an hour. Eventually it stopped, but I kept the door barricaded, remained awake, and waited until the morning to open the door. I have not been back to sleep over at my aunt's house, and I likely never will. Small Town Canadian Mystery by Kiana. I went to visit my auntie and uncle in Canada. They live in a small town that used to be a forest, so everywhere in the city there are lots of deer, coyotes, and sometimes wolves. During the day, you would see deer around, and I remember feeding them apples in my uncle's front yard one time. I have some photos. At night, it was when the wolves and coyotes would come out. Nobody walks around at night, and they would warn 13-year-old me about this. But of course, being the naive teen I was, I didn't listen. I thought if I saw a coyote, I can scare it away. A wolf won't be easy, but whatever. I went outside sometime around 2:30 a.m. I saw lots of deer still outside. No coyotes, no wolves, nothing like that. So I put on my headphones since I didn't see anything worth being worried about. As I started walking, I realized I was near the forest surrounding the town. I took off my headphones and looked around for some time, but I didn't see any animals, and there were no noises or anything to worry about again. All I could hear was myself breathing. I kept my headphones off and decided to turn around because of how creeped out I was. As I began walking back toward the house, I saw a deer in somebody's yard. Now, honestly, I know what most of you are thinking. There's nothing to think of, it's just a deer. So, initially, I didn't think anything of it. But it was looking in their window and pushing on the screen as if it were intently trying to check something out. I stepped on some crunchy leaves, and suddenly it snapped its head at me so fast that I could hear its neck crack slightly. I realized the deer was more significant than just a deer. But then it came out from the shadows. It was walking on its hind legs. I was frozen in place, absolutely in fear, like I was in a trance, and it was strolling towards me. The owner of the house came out with a gun and pointed it at the deer, but he didn't shoot. Finally, he just said, "I will shoot if you don't leave." To my surprise, the deer didn't even look at the man. It just turned away from me and walked back into the forest. The owner said, "You best run home before it comes back." He went inside his house and locked his door. I immediately started running towards my uncle's house like I was a bat out of hell. I felt like I was being watched intently. I looked into the forest and saw two bright dots in the shadows, which looked like eyes. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. I looked back one more time, but I didn't see a thing. A coyote was outside my window that night, and I had to scare it away to sneak back in. I locked my window and shut the blinds and got in bed, but all I could do was lay awake, replaying what I had just seen, over and over. I've only told a few close friends about this, but I should share it with other people, just so they know that there are some weird things happening out there. I Live in a Ghost Town by Autumn W. I currently live in a little town out west. Well, I say town, but it's not exactly what you picture. Though, it's more of like a ghost town than anything. There are only 4 people that live here in total. The only open businesses are the post office, the library, a singular, privately owned pharmacy, and a gas station. There is also an old hotel on the outskirts of town called Bella Muerte. I've worked there for the better part of a century, ever since I was 21 years old. Unlike most kids my age who jumped straight out of high school and into college, I unfortunately had other plans, or should I say, programs just didn't like me. I lived the town over from the previously mentioned one, a city that had far more people and businesses. I worked from place to place for a couple of years, but nothing substantial, just stuff to pay the bills. One day I came home from work, picked up my mail, and headed inside my house. As I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, I absent-mindedly flipped through the mail. Bills and junk mail were all I ever seemed to get, but then I hit the second last piece of mail, and it felt, odd. It's hard to describe, but the letter was ornate. It had a thick texture, made from what I can only imagine was some pretty expensive paper. In the most beautiful, flowing script was printed my full name, clear as day. It had no return address, and it didn't have my address, just my name. The fact that someone knew me intimately enough to hand-deliver a letter to me without me knowing was strange. Admittedly, I had very few friends because I grew up an army brat and moved around a lot. I only had a handful of people that knew me well enough to know where I even lived. Out of sheer curiosity, I proceeded to open the letter. On the finest parchment paper on the most delicate letterhead read the following words. "Dear Miss Autumn, I am writing to offer you the most prestigious position at our establishment, the Hotel Bella Muerte. For over 200 years, our establishment has been a heaven for the weary and restless, the old, the young, and the forgotten, and men and women and animals alike. However, recently we have had an ongoing issue with looking for a new caretaker, and would like to offer the position to you." The letter said that along with the position, a hotel room, or small apartment as you will, would come with the job, and a salary 4 times what I was currently making a year. The hotel's name seemed familiar, yet everything about the letter and position seemed to be way too good to be true, like a scam of some sort. That's when I noticed at the bottom of the job offer was the address. That, my friends, was when my interest was truly piqued. It was only 1 town over. That's when it clicked in my brain. The Hotel Bella Muerte. Ever since I could remember, there have been rumors and stories about the Hotel Bella Muerte. Strange tales that seemed to be odd, way too scary to be true. Tales of ghosts, strange travelers, and much more. We sure heard the rumors, but few people I knew actually believed in them. The kids in the town I lived in would say that if you set foot in the hotel, you would be driven to madness and go loco, as they would say. The tales were just so bizarre. How could we believe them? So after a few days of deliberating, I wrote back accepting the job opportunity. A few days later, I got a letter to congratulate me and set the start date. I was to start the following Monday around noon. As I got ready that following Monday, I put on my best clothing, did my makeup and hair, the girly things, tripped over thin air as I went to the kitchen to get my coffee to go. Then I got in my 1965 red convertible Mustang and made the short drive. On the way into town, I passed by, nothing. The land is entirely barren outside the city I grew up in, except for the tumbleweeds, brush, and bracken that look too perfect to start a brush fire if you ask me, and the few twisted, gnarled elder trees that once stood tall perhaps, but now are nothing more than sorry shadows of what they used to be. I think typical Western movie scenes when I drive out here. The town that held the hotel looked much more similar, with run-down buildings that barely could be considered standing. The further into this ghost town you got, the more exact things became. The gas station was the first thing that looked like it held any living beings. The pharmacy was next, the library, and then the post office. They were all about equal in size and looked just about as run down as any other building, with peeling paint that fell in ribbons to the ground when the wind was strong and acting up. And suddenly I saw it for the first time. The Hotel Bella Muerte, live and in person, and it did not even compare to what I had in mind. When I pictured it, I thought of a run-down building, filled with cockroaches and rats, with only the lowest kind of people staying there. The kind of place where the police did stakeouts to bust drug dealers and hookers. What other kind of place could be in a run-down town like this? But I was so wrong. The sight that greeted me as I pulled up to the parking lot of that place was one I could barely even believe. The hotel was, in a word, magnificent. It looked like it belonged to a fancy city, not a barren wasteland. The outside of the hotel fit the town and the period of the 1800s, with a high-rise balcony and white pillars that stood tall and straight. The brickwork was perfectly inlaid, faded red due to the wear and tear of time, yet still hardy in structure. It looked only a little better in its heyday, if nothing else, than its newness. Whoever owned the building took great care of it, whether in restoration or simple upkeep. It was something to see for sure. As I got out of my car and walked up the front steps, admiring all the intricate woodwork that went into its structure, I looked above the front door and read the sign. The Hotel Bella Muerte, established 1802. I turned the knob of the old door, no gates or groans, just silence as the door pivoted on its hinges, and walked inside. Now, as impressed as I was with the outside of the place, it didn't even compare to what was before my eyes. As you entered the lobby, the first thing that would come to your attention was the grand staircase made of beautiful mahogany wood, rich in cherry brown undertones, swooping as it dipped from its height down to the floor. Then to the left, I became aware of the lobby desk. It was the same type of wood as the staircase, with intricate designs that swirled down its length, carved out by some long dead carpenter. Behind the desk were the letter boxes with the numbers carefully and expertly placed into their centers, numbering 1 to 15. The parlor was to the right, and it looked as though it was frozen in time like the rest of the place, with old furniture with floor designs and high backs to the wallpaper that looked much of the same. It was stupendous. After I had gotten done admiring the lobby, I slowly walked over to the desk. No one was there, not a single soul. I rang the bell on the counter, yet no one came, and after a few more minutes of waiting, I called out, "Hello?" And still no one came. I wondered what I should do next. In our correspondence, I never got a phone number despite noticing an old rotary phone on the desk near the letterboxes. Then I realized I never got the name of the person I was corresponding with either. I was still determining who the employer actually was. As I grappled with this realization, the phone began to ring, breaking the silence. I almost jumped out of my skin, scared absolutely out of my mind by the loud ringing in the otherwise quiet room. Then, after no one magically appeared to answer it, it fell silent after the fourth ring, only to begin ringing once more. After regaining my composure, I walked around the desk to the back, looking around as I did so and feeling as if I were a child about to be caught with my hand in the cookie jar, and I picked up the phone. The whole conversation weirded me out. It seemed so insensitive, yet rushed despite the cheery nature of their voices and reactions, and the weird pet names, of course. I looked at the table next to the phone. As the sisters had said, there was a letter. I opened the letter quickly with the ornate silver letter opener conveniently placed in the first drawer I looked through. Out from the envelope popped a long, and I mean 2-foot letter made of the same parchment paper as my offer letter. As I started to read, I became increasingly more confused and worried. What had I gotten myself into? The letter usually started enough. It outlined the general duties of the job. How to receive payment. $50 per night. Stunningly low. I thought for such a place as this, but I'd never been in the hotel business and I wouldn't know otherwise. Housekeeping, even down to the way they wanted the toilet paper changed, was all written down. Oddly enough, they wanted us to put the toilet paper in the wrong way, going under the roll, but who am I to judge? Last but not least, a long set of rules was written that honestly made no sense. Written in bold red print was this following set of rules. Rule number 126. Always lock the doors at night. You don't want to let them in. Rule number 127. Make sure you feed Jesus every night, or else. Rule 128. Only take the trash out during daylight hours. Rule 129. Make sure you face the dolls in the doll room facing the wall at night. Rule number 130. Don't ever take candy from the pharmacist. Rule number 131. Never return a book late to the librarian. Rule number 132. Always lick the stamps in the presence of the postman. And rule number 133. Never leave the town under any circumstances, or you'll regret it. And that was that. Not threatening at all, or bizarre, or extremely specific. Just a standard set of rules that made the place seem a little more, undesirable. Now I thought I had gotten myself into something not good. And yet, I was absolutely thoroughly intrigued. I mean, what happens if I leave the town? Why did I have to lock the doors at night, and who was them? Why did I have to take the trash out during the day? And who the hell was Jesus? Nothing made sense. Since I was going to be here a while, I decided to settle in. I looked at the letter again, and at the end was my room number and key in the envelope. Room number 16. There was one extra room in the hotel. After I got the key, I put the letter back in its place and walked up the stairs to explore my new home. The doors on the second floor spanned 3 hallways and a dining room attached to a kitchen. Each room, numbered 1 through 16, alternated from the left side of the hallway to the adjacent side of the room, and then right back again. The walls almost felt like they were breathing, expanding and contracting no matter where you stood, giving you this dizzying effect. It reminded me of one thing, that movie The Shining, and no thank you. As I walked the halls, reaching the dining room, I passed by and I could have sworn I saw a dark shadow pass by the half-open door, but when I looked inside, there was absolutely nothing there. There were only tables and chairs and waiting tables lining the area. Strange, I thought, but I just shrugged it off and continued down the hall. Numbers 13, 14, and 15, and finally, room 16. As I jiggled the old skeleton key in its lock, there appeared to be a slight mumbling coming from the other side of the door. I promptly stopped and listened, but there was nothing but a solitary sound. So I proceeded to open the door. Once it was unlocked, my room, like the rest of the place, was absolutely lovely, but it was empty. Nothing to explain that strange mumbling sound. The queen-sized bed with ornate canopy, all white billowing in the soft breeze from the open window, stood in the left-hand side of the room towards the middle of the length of the wall. The small sitting area was to the right with a wardrobe, a small couch, and 2 high-backed chairs of the same make as those in the sitting room downstairs, the same floral patterns and everything. The open balcony windows were straight ahead. As I walked to them, I became all too aware of the mumbling again. I spun around quickly to see a bird's perch at the edge of the cage corner. I spun around quickly to see a bird's perch and a cage in the corner of the right side of the room. When I say bird, I don't mean a parrot or a cockatoo or even a parakeet or finch. What I saw sitting there was a massive raven. It was just talking. Just strange phrases and random words, but human words nonetheless. I began to approach the bird, and it let out a loud squawk, flapped its wings, and flew straight into my face, blinding me for a second. For visual's sake, it's fair to mention that I really don't like birds. Yes, they are or can be pretty, but they have beautiful songs and all that good stuff, but honestly, it's just not my thing, and I'm sure they're great companions for some people, but I, however, am not one of those people and don't particularly appreciate them or their little, or in this case, enormous, flappy wings that come flying into my face. So I screamed out loud, which only made the screech louder with its horrible, croaky voice. Then, as soon as it had hit me, it flew away. I took my arms down for a moment knowing it was gone, which had been trying to shield my face, and began to look around the room. Not a bird in sight. Had I just dreamed it, or was I just starting to go loco already? I have heard many, many rumors about Hotel Bella Muerte. After calming down a bit, I began to shrug off the fear and replaced it with determination to settle in and set up the room with my things. Once I finished, I heard a strange sound when I put the last pair of pants in the wardrobe. A little dinging sound. That's when I realized I was listening to the bell downstairs. Someone was in the lobby, and it was time for me to begin my job. And with that, I will end my initial story, and I will send in a part 2 very soon. Don't you worry, Swamp Dweller. Knight's Landing. I'm afraid of that place. I haven't been back in a long, long time. I'm scared to go there. Somewhere in Northern California, an hour from the coast in a dry valley, there's a place. This place was my second home. I spent almost every weekend there for many years until I was a teenager. A property in the outskirts of a boring small town near a creek in a well-sized patch of woods. We did a lot of things there, and we had room and confidence. A creaky old house, dimly lit, covered by trees, and a small garden to the side. The light only went so far from the windows and porch before it was total darkness, and a short walk to the other 2 buildings, old, long, empty garages filled with tables and chairs for parties. Probably about 50 feet long, 10 feet wide, side by side, and although they said no further than 20 feet from each other, they both had very different atmospheres. One was a beacon of light in the darkness, rather a checkpoint, before it was total darkness. They were bustling with life from family gatherings and parties, but never the second. Only 20 feet away, it was always too dark even to see. And on the other side of that, well, that's the scariest part of that place. The 4 mysterious homemade concrete graves. Right next to this building, and beyond that debris, giant rocks and tons of firewood picture almost a scrapyard with 0 light. The building was scary, but at least it was closer to the light. I have plenty of stories from here, ghosts and intruders and otherworldly and not worldly things. But this time, I'm going to concentrate on beyond those property lines, beyond the empty field adjacent to the old building, Cache Creek. Back then, the rules were don't go into that building at night, but we always did. They told us not to stray past the graves at night, but we always did. They told us not to go to the scrapyard, but yet we always did. But what we would not do is go past that field. It was almost an unspoken rule. No one ever brought it up, no one ever suggested attempting to make the trip, and we were reckless as kids, but not suicidal. We remember when we would sleep over when we were younger, my grandma would put us in the house before 12. That creaky old house. Too many for 1-story, 3-bedroom house. You could see the end of it from where you enter. A straight shot. Living room, dining room, kitchen. All the rooms to the left. Room 1 by the front door, room 2 by the end of the living room, and room 3 by the dining room and the bathroom in the kitchen. And then out the back door. We all funneled into the living room while the adults slept in their rooms. We slept on the floor, and we'd stay up longer than them, but not for long. We'd get too scared. I'd remember no one talking about these things, just a look on everyone's face. Then everyone lays down or pretends nothing happened. These types of occurrences were daily at this place. But there is something that I will never forget more than anything. One night, while everybody was asleep except for us kids, it was maybe 30 minutes after everybody went to sleep, and the house was all quiet except for us whispering away and talking. Honestly, when I started hearing the noises at first, I thought they were maybe just insects or maybe a cat or something. But then we started hearing distant screams far off. A chill ran down my spine instantly. Suddenly it sounds like something slams into the front door and starts scratching at the walls, the door, and the sides of the house. Everywhere. It sounds like something is running around the house. The scratches, like I said, started at the front door, and then suddenly they were at the back door, then the right, and all at once, Sometimes it just sounded like one finger, and other times it sounded like a full claw. We were all scared out of our wits. The scratching then stopped, and for a moment everything went silent before we heard a massive thud on the top of the roof. I felt fragile under it. I felt like at any moment that the roof would cave in on top of us, and we would be this thing's meal, whatever it was. Eventually, the adults woke up and went to see what was going on, asking if we were horsing around. Once they saw how scared we were, they walked outside. The wind seemed to calm, and everything seemed to drift off into silence. I survived that night somehow, and so did all of us. The next day, when I asked the adults what they saw, they wouldn't tell me. They wouldn't tell me if it was wolves, big coyotes, nothing. No response at all. All I knew is I heard something that night. I was young, maybe 5 or 6 at the time, and now I'm 22, and I can tell you for a fact that my reckless curiosity still gets the best of me sometimes. But I know one thing is there was something out there that night. I can't explain what it was. How's it going, Swamp Dweller? I hope all is well with you and those in the swamp. I've been listening to your channel for quite some time now, on the way to work and on long trips. I've wanted to submit my story for a while now and just haven't found the time to write it up. I currently live and work in Texas, but I'm originally from a small town in middle Georgia, where this story takes place. I can't give too many specifics about the area since there are some significant archaeological finds, and the landowner doesn't want trespassers to mess with them. He also doesn't want anyone from the government showing up on his front porch and trying to take it. Anyways, I lived a good way outside of the city limits. Nothing but dirt roads and trees as far as you wanted to drive. A couple of neighbors here and there, but they were few and very far between. Every summer when the mullet would run up the rivers from the ocean to spawn, we would spend as much time as possible on a particular sandbar on that river. One of the dirt roads ended where a logging trail started, which also happened to be right by my aunt and uncle's house on the left side of the road, and one of my cousins on the right. The trail led from the road, snaked through planted pines and hardwoods, and eventually found its way to the sandbar on the river. My uncle and cousin were good friends with the man that owned that land between the house and the river, which I learned was about 500 or more acres. And when they invited my dad down there, he realized it was a man he had worked with. They didn't know each other very well, but they knew each other well enough that the man told my dad he could come down here whenever he wanted. So, whenever he was off work in those summer months, he was down there, with a salt block and a mesh bag full of chicken, stabbed into the ground with metal poles in the middle of the river, to bait up the mullet. After baiting them the night before, he'd buy the worms and beer, find him a piece of river cane, or buy a cane pole if he was feeling a little lazy, and get everything ready to leave at the crack of dawn the next day. And almost every time my mom, my little brother, and I were with him. We were familiar with a good portion of the trails because when we weren't fishing, we would spend all night riding four-wheelers and taking hikes on the logging trails down there, hitting every mud hole in sight, pushing 1-inch thick sheets of ice out of the watering holes in the winter, just seeing how much we could do before our toys broke. Sometimes we'd have as many as 10 or 15 or so four-wheelers, and we'd all stop at this shack on the river and build a bonfire. My brother and I were around 13 to 17 years old as this went on for a couple of years before and after my encounter. My dad never explicitly gave us a beer, but we knew if we snuck a few when he was not looking, he'd assume he drank them. But I'm just rambling about the good old days. Anyway, I'd often wander off through the woods when my dad was fishing because, at the time, I hadn't gotten into fishing myself yet. I will tell you this is in the Oconee River. There used to be Native Americans who lived on the river. There's pottery and arrowheads galore. I would visit the rock houses where they lived. There's even a fishing trap they built still in the river. It's in a part of the river that winds through the land. These are the reasons we don't want people there. I'd walk these trails barefooted and shirtless all day long like the kid I was, and still am at heart. And with no cell phone, just a Bowie knife for protection and a couple of water bottles, I'd disappear early in the morning and come back about 4 or 5 in the evening because I knew my dad would barely eat all day if the fish were biting good, and he'd be ready to eat supper. My parents never worried because they knew I belonged in nature more than I did in the real world anyway. I was around 15 at the time of this encounter. The day started like always. I got to the sandbar and helped unload another salt block and some more chicken feed to keep it from running out during the day. I was swimming with my brother for a little while, and then I put my jeans back on and disappeared. Picture something like Huck Finn, with my cheap straw hat and blue jeans rolled up like I was expecting a flood, the likes of which haven't been seen since Noah built the ark. On this day I had a fresh pouch of Redmond Chew, Golden Blend to be exact, that I had gotten a friend's dad to buy for me, and I was loving life. I packed a fat chew and set out on my search for more pottery and arrowheads. As I got closer from the sandbar and deeper into the woods, I noticed pebbles flying through the trees and landing near my feet. Occasionally, one would bounce off my back or whiz past my ears. I thought it might have been my brother sneaking around and messing with me, but after dealing with this for over 2 miles, I was coming to a point in the trail where usually I could turn around on the four-wheeler and go back home. But ahead of me was a dried-up creek bed about 3 feet deep, which is why we would turn the four-wheelers around. I saw it just as I was about to turn around and walk somewhere else. About 10 feet ahead of me, right in the middle of the trail, was the perfect arrowhead. It was the best one I had ever seen. I guessed spearhead would be more proper for it. It was about 3 inches long and an inch or so wide. When I picked it up, I noticed that it was completely intact. No broken points or anything. And it was like a solid deep purple color. I bent down to pick it up and examine it for a minute, and excited would be an understatement. But as I looked up, I noticed something else. Behind a tall, healthy pine tree about 30 feet in front of where I was now standing was a massive arm, and peeking around the trunk of the tree was a face. I didn't get time to make much sense before I saw this thing move behind the tree and try to hide there in all its glory. It just stood there, arms by its side facing me, never once making a threatening move towards me. It was at least 7 or maybe even 8 feet tall and covered in matted, rust-colored hair or fur. From what I could tell, it had a very muscular physique. The face resembled that of a man but was more ancient, leathery, and wrinkled by the hands of time. But the eyes stood out to me just as much as the non-threatening posture. They weren't some abysmal black pits, they were glowing red orbs of anger and hatred. They were like our eyes, although I can't describe the color. It was like the sun hit them and reflected a goldish green color. The look in its eyes seemed very intelligent. I feel like it was studying me as much as I was it. It almost seemed to question what I was and what I was doing in its home. And why did I not mess myself and take off running? I can't tell you. There was also no eerie silence at any point, no putrid smell. The birds were still chirping, the chorus of frogs and crickets never skipped a beat, and I smelled the delightful scent of the wind, honeysuckles growing wild and free nearby. It was almost as if this thing were a spirit, but I can tell you it was accurate as any person you've ever stood before you in your life. We studied each other for what felt like an eternity, but was no more than 10 seconds. Then, without taking my eyes off this creature, I crouched down and placed the spearhead exactly where I had picked it up from, and almost as if I had read this thing's mind, it sort of nodded, turned around, and walked back into the dense forest. It never faded out of existence as a spirit might. I watched it disappear as it effortlessly walked through the vines and blackberry patches, and even after I couldn't see it anymore, I could hear it moving, branches crunching out of its way. After I no longer heard it, I turned around and walked straight back to the sandbar just in time to get in the truck and go home. I didn't say a word to anybody about it for quite some time. Then one night, as we were on one of our four-wheeler rides, I brought it up after we snuck a couple of beers, and my friend just gave me this weird look. But one of my other cousins who was there with us, who was also known to be a jokester, was the first one to say something. Until then, I had never heard him say anything as serious as this in all of our lives. I could hear the sincerity in his voice when he spoke. He told me that while he hadn't seen the creature himself, the loggers did. He asked if I ever wondered why they only cut small portions of the trees. They left their equipment down there one night, and when they came back the next day, a door to one of the trucks had been seriously damaged. It was severely smashed in and pulled open. They figured it must have gotten hit by a big log or a piece of equipment, and nobody wanted to get in trouble, so they didn't claim it. They decided they would deal with it after work, so they continued about their day. A few hours later, they noticed something in the creek bed I mentioned earlier. At first, they thought just maybe it was a hog, as they were a nuisance in the area. Then it stood up on 2 feet. They said they could see about 5 feet of it, but as I said before, the creek is about 3 feet deep. It chucked a huge log, and they hurriedly got out of there. They returned to get their equipment within the next week and never returned to this day. My cousin then went on to tell me some of the strange experiences he's had for himself down there, and I told him some more of mine. Those will have to be said later though, as it's getting late, and I must work tomorrow. I do want to mention that after the encounter, I never stopped walking the trails. As I said, I didn't feel that this thing was threatening me, and I almost feel like it was a protector of the woods. The loggers were destroying the place, and it showed aggression. I barely disturbed the area and always thanked the creator of the arrowheads or pottery I found for giving me a glimpse into the past, and I was spared. On later walks, I still had pebbles plinking through the trees and heard branches snapping, but it always made me feel safer knowing I had something watching over me. In roughly 11 years, I've only told one other person this story. Thank you for finally giving me a platform to share this story with like-minded individuals. I hope you have a blessed day, and always keep an open mind about things we know nothing about. Not everything is out to get you. I live in a city in northeastern India, but my parents and I always go to visit our grandma's house on the holidays, and on some occasions in the countryside. I'm 18 years old. The small town, which is kind of a village my grandma's house is in, is on farmland surrounded by many woods, if you get what I'm saying. So let's cut to the scary part. The town is like any other ordinary small town in our state, but the people have been seeing some weird stuff throughout the years. There are countless stories, so I will try to write the ones I remember. The oldest I can remember was told by my dad when I was a kid. He said that he and his friend and some of my uncles were drinking and talking in the cabin attached to the back of my grandmother's house in the backyard. The backyard is attached to a small pond and a few square kilometers of woods and farmland, since my family from my mother's side owned many parts of the property. So as I said, they were enjoying the stuff when they saw a fireball going through the bamboo trees in the backyard. He said fireball, but it wasn't attached to anything like a stick or a lamp, and they didn't hear footsteps or see anyone. The odd detail is, they said the fireball was blue. I don't know, but I saw those associated with spirits and stuff somewhere. Next was an occasion I can't quite remember. The whole incident is very foggy, but my aunt was cooking in the kitchen, and she heard a whistle in the backyard through the window in the kitchen. After some time, my dad and one of my uncles returned to throw away the previous day's trash. He said he saw a guy using our abandoned toilet in the backyard. The bathroom's made by my grandpa, since many people in that area are very poor. So my dad and my uncle approached the guy and asked what he was doing, when he had just said that he was there to use their toilet since my uncle sensed some danger, like the guy could be a robber or something. Hence, he and my father returned to the house to pick up some tools, phones, torches, and a safety knife. But the guy was not there when they returned. They went in for just a minute to collect the supplies, and my aunt in the kitchen, looking out the window, said that he just vanished. I don't know if it was paranormal, an attempted robbery, or something else. Now, there are other events like one of my uncles who partied late at night was coming back one night when we heard something following him. The road was of course dark, mildly foggy, and no one else was out there. Such a cliché. So of course he got scared and began looking back with his phone flashlight and walking fast when the footsteps started creeping him out. He started saying God's prayer and played a song on his phone. He began walking faster. Still, after just a few steps his phone died and he could hear the footsteps chasing him. He sprinted through our backyard because of a shortcut. Our backyard and farmlands are all connected to the road. When he came home, I don't remember what exactly happened. But still I remember him saying to his mother, which is my grandma, that he was chased by something. He said it was a solo footstep though, like it was something with only one foot hopping after him. The following day he told the whole story that I just wrote, and most of my family shrugged it off as a mild paranormal incident. As I said before, this town has bizarre things going on, so it's natural to become used to it. This happened to my friend Alex and me a couple of months ago around March of 2020. We both attended a school on California's Central Coast. One weekend in April sometime, Alex invited me to join him on a drive a few cities up north where he was picking up a dog he was interested in fostering. Once we picked up the dog, who is a lovely boy, we drove a bit further north to eat before heading back down to go home. We ordered ahead, and once we arrived, we picked up our food. Dine-in regulations are already in place because of COVID at that point. Both new to the area, we Google a park nearby to head out to eat. We pulled up to an empty park. There was only one other person there. He parks on a curb in front of another car, which is important. We quickly walk a few feet to a bench and a table near the curb, tie the dog to a public barbecue grill next to us, and began to eat. We were almost immediately approached by a man intent on talking to us. He specifically asked us about the dog, how old he is, his nature, is he mean, does he bite? Alex is busy answering the man's questions while trying to calm the dog down, and eventually shifts his attention only to the dog. The conversation ends with the man stands there for a minute or two just staring at us, but only I notice because Alex is still making sure the dog doesn't try to escape. We both, however, agree that the conversation was quite weird. Anyway, the man walks away towards a shaded area next to the restrooms, under a large canopy type thing. Many parks in California have these. I don't really know how to explain it. I noticed that he sits with another man I had not seen previously, but I wasn't thinking much of it. At this point, the dog is still being troublesome, but I continue to eat. I feel like we're being watched, and I looked over, and the two men are just staring at us, not talking at all. I think it's weird, and I start to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Alex is still struggling with the dog, and when I look over again, I only see one of the men, the one who had not approached us. And when I look again, the one who did was coming for us, hiding behind a vending machine, poking his head out, looking at us ever so slightly, and I catch him. Without hesitating, I tell Alex to grab his stuff and get in his car. He doesn't even question me for a second. We gather our stuff and put it in his car. As we do so, the man still sitting and watching us approaches. And as soon as we get into the car, he begins to talk to us, asking us about the dog and its temperament again. He asked if he's protective and if he bites. Alex barely answers him and starts the car. The man then walks past our vehicle, gets into the car parked behind us where someone has been inside watching us the entire time from just a few feet away without either of us realizing. Over the next 10 to 15 minutes, we pull out of the parking lot, and the other car does the same. We immediately fear that they might be following us, so Alex does a random series of turns until we end up in a neighborhood, and sure enough, the car is still behind us. They are tailgating us at this point, and we're both very freaked out, so we do a few random turns until we enter a roundabout, in which Alex very poorly exits, and they lose us. Very stupidly, we map another park for us to finish eating and arrive at a garden with a good amount of people, only a few streets away. We park, sit on a bench, and keep eating. Maybe 5 minutes later, Alex notices the same car entered the parking lot, and they park near where we were eating. No one exits the car, and we grab our stuff and leave, this time down south. The car starts to pull out too, but luckily we lost them, because we got on the street first. Ghost Hunting in Rural Georgia by J. Mad. Hi, Swamp Dweller. My other stories have not been all that scary and more of enjoyable type tales that I thought you'd like. So I decided to share one of the times that I was truly afraid for my life. In Georgia, there are a lot of bridges, and most of them are covered. My family and I have made a point to try to go to all of them. But there is one in particular that we enjoy going to mainly because we think it's haunted. People see different things and hear other things. You'll see items left behind by people doing ceremonies and things like that. Candles, salt ring pentagrams, stuff like that. The night that scared me, we had gone out to the bridge. We were taking pictures, asking questions, and recording like always. We've got some pretty exciting recordings and answers to our questions in the past. We even got disembodied screams that nobody heard at all at the time, but when we played it back, it was clear as day. There were always orbs when people in the group were feeling things. This particular night, it was rather hushed. No one was picking up anything. No lights, no noises, but that was the thing.
It was extra quiet. There was no noise from anyone except the nearby road. Now, this bridge you cannot cross with a car. You have to walk on it. The wood is very old and has given away in some places, so you must be incredibly careful. This night, we made it across the bridge. I would get a bad feeling very often, but it would be because the others were running away, or screaming, or messing with us. Finally, we all made it to the other side of the bridge. We were standing there, and on that particular side of the bridge was private property. Unlike the bridge and the other side, it was county property. So none of us really dared to step onto the private property, but we did exit the bridge, turn around, and look up. As we did this, there was this creature hanging halfway off the top of the bridge. It was white, almost see-through skin. It was skeletal, and the skin didn't seem to fit its bones. It was like it was loose, but not so open that it was sagging. And then there was the smell. I've been around dead bodies before, for various reasons, and honestly, it smelled like when a body's pulled out of a body of water that had been sitting in there for quite some time. A floater, a bloater, if you will. People have many terms for it, but it smelled awful. The eyes were somehow black and yet red at the same time. The black was blacker than night. I know that doesn't really make any sense, and the red was like a ring in the eye. It had unnaturally long arms and legs and was crawling and holding on to the top of the bridge. The group I was with ran back onto the bridge, tripped, and crawled to get to the car. I was staring at this thing absolutely in awe. It was staring back at me. I felt cold all over. It was like I couldn't move, and I know it sounds cliche at this point, but this is far before Harry Potter or any of those things that I've ever seen. The only way I can describe this thing is like a Dementor, making you feel like as you'll never be happy again, like it was sucking the soul right out of my face. That's what this felt like. My friends were yelling for me to come on. They had already made it to the car, and they didn't realize until they arrived that I was still standing there frozen in place. Suddenly, I felt this trance kind of just end. I shook it off and started running back onto the bridge. The creature slashed its arm at me, and one of the claws on its hand caught me just a little bit. I heard it running on the bridge's roof. As I sprinted for the car, everyone was already there screaming, flashing the light and honking the horn, doing anything they could think of to try to scare this creature away. As I exited the bridge, the arms came down, grabbed me just under the armpits by both arms, and attempted to lift me. I dug my hands into the arms, holding me, thrashing around, kicking and screaming. I'm unsure whether I threw the creature off balance or what happened, but it fell from the roof, and I went tumbling with it. I got up quickly, ran to the car, and got in. We tore out of there. I still have a little scar on the back of my neck from all this. We returned to the bridge several times after this, and I've never seen that creature again. But none of my friends that night would ever talk to anybody about what they had seen. They were afraid that they would be considered crazy. I'm the only one left who remembers that night. My other friends died over the years from medical issues and old age. I don't know what it was, and I've never felt anything like that from any other spirit or creature I've ever encountered over the years. As I said, I don't know what the heck it was. I don't know what it wanted, or why it singled me out. Maybe because of my sensitivity and everything else that supernaturally had come in and out of my life over the years. I couldn't tell you. All I know is that when I was unsure if I would survive, I felt like my days were numbered. I saw my life flashing before my eyes, and I had no idea if anybody would ever know what happened to me. Thank you, Swamp Dweller, for letting me tell my story. The Creature in the Holler by Teresa P. Hello, Swamp Dweller. I've been listening to your YouTube channel for about 6 months, and I am finally comfortable enough to share my story. To give you some background, I live in a part of West Virginia where every Wrong Turn movie was made. I live about 2 miles off the paved road back at the very end of the holler. We have plenty of regular wildlife, such as bears, coyotes, etc. I've been comfortable deep in the mountains for years, until about 6 months ago. It was about 2 a.m., and I was woken by the hunting hounds out back going nuts, barking their absolute heads off. So, I turned on my bedside lamp, got up, and put on my bathrobe. I was just about to go back to see what the problem was when I saw this creature outside my bedroom window. Now, the windows are about 6 feet off the ground from the outside, making this creature anywhere between 8 to 9 feet tall. I was frozen in place in fear. This thing had a massive head. It was either a wolf or a dog or something in between. It was moving upright on 2 legs. It was covered in dark hair and had an elongated snout with a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. I returned to my senses and reached over to turn off the lamp. As I did, the thing turned to look at me. It had almost glowing, yellow eyes and let out this massive growl that pierced through the night. It shook me to the core. Then, suddenly, I was moving, running through the house, closing windows, locking them and locking doors. I huddled in the bathroom with my cell phone, calling my husband at work and begging him to come home. Instead, he said he was leaving immediately, and he told me to get the rifle and keep it with me. I returned to the bedroom to get the rifle, and suddenly there was banging on the outside wall. It sounded like fists being beaten against the outside of the house. I was terrified that it was trying to get in. I returned to the bathroom and hid in the tub with the rifle. I heard some more pounding, and then suddenly all went quiet. I waited, and after a couple of minutes I heard sirens. My husband had called the police. He told them to meet them at the house because I was hysterical on the phone. He had no idea if it was an intruder or what else. So after ensuring that I was okay and nobody else was about, we went outside with the police. Where I heard the pounding, there were sets of dents on the side of our house about 10 feet off the ground. There were claw marks all around the bedroom window as if something had tried to get in. My husband has changed shifts, so now he is always home at night. We also put up 3 pole lights to light the entire perimeter at night. The mountains of West Virginia are a wonderful sight to see, but they also have monsters, so be careful hiking and camping in this region, and always try to be in a group, never alone. Mount Kearsarge Supernatural Experience by Anonymous.
This story takes place on a lake in central New Hampshire, just a few miles north of the base of Mount Kearsarge. My friend has a cabin there, and his grandfather built it shortly after returning from the Second World War, and one warm summer night between my junior and senior years of high school, he and I were there, just hanging out. While we did drink and partake in the ganja from time to time, we were not intoxicated in any way on this night. We had simply been bored in our little hometown about 30 miles or approximately 48 kilometers to the south. So on a whim one evening, we decided to drive up and spend the night there, to light a fire and sit by the water on the beach chairs, and enjoy the nighttime t-shirt and swimming trunks weather while it lasted. I would say it was around 9 or 10 p.m., and we had gotten up to inspect his grandfather's old canoe that laid upside down atop the wooden dock because we wanted to use it the next day to head to the lone island to look for loon nests and try to catch some catfish. As we walked to the dock from where we had been sitting, I gazed across the lake at Mount Kearsarge. The mountain has a height of 2,937 feet, or 895 meters, and a prominence of 2,080 feet, or 630 meters. So, since it was basically 2,000 feet straight up from our position, as we were only a couple of miles from its summit, it was quite an imposing figure in the night sky. Now the mountain has a tower on the peak that flashes a red light at night. There is only one light, and it is red. I had seen it many times before. It was just a fact, however, as I followed my friend to the dock, that I noticed there were more than 2 lights on this night. In addition to the usual red flashing light, there was a second, yellowish-orange orb to its right, essentially equidistant in height. It was not moving, flashing, pulsating, nothing. It just hung there, motionless in the night sky. I told my friend, who was immediately interested, and so we were both just stood there, transfixed for a while before he asked me what the hell I thought it was. I would have immediately considered a helicopter, but it was just so still and silent. After just a few moments of silent staring, we both shrugged our shoulders and continued down to the canoe at the end of the dock. We inspected it for a while, placing it in the lake to check for leaks, and decided that it was good to go, which was exciting, as we were really looking forward to getting on the water. After lugging it back to the original resting position, I turned to my right and bent down to wash the cobwebs off my fingers in the lake. As I was doing this, I returned my gaze to the mountain, and to my amazement, there were now two identical orbs, one on either side of the red flashing light. I smacked my friend across the shoulder and told him to look up, and again, we just stared transfixed, albeit this time a little more anxiety-ridden. "What the hell?" my friend said, with a bit of fear creeping into his voice. Without averting our gaze, we backpedaled to our chairs and began discussing possibilities. It is important to note that both of us were science-believing realists, and still are to this day. We both accepted the distinct possibility that we, humanity, were most likely not alone in this never-ending galaxy, let alone the universe. Something, all the grains of sand on Earth. You know, the old Carl Sagan adage. So, as we sat, discussing both the Fermi paradox and the likelihood that it was just some sort of temporary, human-made thing going on top of the mountain, something happened. Before our eyes, one of the orbs slowly descended below the backside of the mountain and out of sight. I'm sorry, I know I am no aeronautical engineer or anything, but I know what a helicopter looks like when it descends in elevation. This was not like that at all. It sunk down and out of sight in less than just a few seconds, very smoothly, all without making any lateral movement whatsoever. We were stunned, but before we had time to wallow in this feeling or think that we could have possibly seen something unnatural, the other orb took off from its position. It did not gain or lose any elevation. It just took off horizontally at breakneck speed and began to make its way around the edge of the lake. It was not until the light was about halfway between its starting point and our position that we began to consider that it might be heading straight for us. We stood still at the shore and followed the objects with our eyes. Out of sheer curiosity, and without speaking, we both made an unconscious decision to wait and see what would happen. I mean, what else were we supposed to do? At no point did we talk or look at each other. We just stood there, watching. Without leaving you in suspense for too long, the object did eventually arrive to where we were, and upon its arrival, it slowed to a crawl and crept over us at a snail's pace. It was big. Not stereotypically mothership big, but big. I do not know exactly, but if I had to estimate, I would say it was about 50 meters in length by 30 meters in width. It was shaped like a fat cigar, and had 2 or 3 rows of orange lights on its bottom. I cannot tell you what my friend was doing or how he was reacting at this time, for I was entranced. I remember thinking that I had never had an opportunity to view something like this, and I probably would never get another chance again. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, so I stared intensely, examining anything and everything about it that I could. Unfortunately, there were not many details that I could make out, only its approximate dimensions and the rows of lights. It made no real sounds aside from what I perceived to be a very, very faint humming. There were no beams of light shooting down at us or anything like that. We stood in the pitch blackness of the late New Hampshire night, and I remember preparing myself for something to happen to us. But as far as I know, nothing ever did. As soon as it had crept its way past us, it took off as fast as it had appeared, up into the night sky and out of sight. At that point, I shot my head back across the lake towards the mountain. There was nothing but the normal, flashing red light remaining. All appeared to be back to normal. I do not think we said anything to each other aside from, "Let's get out of here," or something to that effect, before grabbing what little we had brought with us and hightailing it back to my friend's car. We drove the 30 miles back to our hometown, purchased some snacks at the convenience store, and returned to his house where we proceeded to set up the same beach chairs that we had brought with us to the lake in his backyard, where we stayed up for most of the night, talking about what the hell we had just seen. For the next few weeks, my mind had hardly focused on anything else. I told my parents at some point, but they sort of just laughed it off, telling me that it must have been a helicopter or something like that. And after their reaction, I decided not to tell anyone else. Not until I was older and gave no crap about what people would think of me. It was only then that I began to tell my trusted friends about what happened that night. My friend and I have since parted ways. We live across an ocean from each other now and talk from time to time. In fact, it has been a few years since one of us brought it up. However, sitting here and writing this down, it just now made me want to reach out and talk with him again. I know what I saw, and it was not constructed by humanity. We do not have that sort of technology, at least, not that we know of. And if we do,
There is far more hidden from the average citizen of the Earth than I thought possible. But I am digressing into conspiracy theories now, and that is a path that I try not to go down. The fact is that the possibility that we are alone in the universe is so microscopically small. Consider this. There are billions of planets out there that are much, much older than Earth. All it would take is one of them to have developed intelligent life a few million years before us, giving them a massive head start in the development and technology scheme that would allow them to create machines that could do what these objects are. Thank you for sharing my story, Swamp Dweller. I hope you enjoyed it. The Cabin Getaway I'll Never Forget by Anonymous. It was about late November in Colorado, and I was about 7 or 8 years old. My father had the great idea of taking us all for a weekend to a cabin that he was going to rent. My mother thought it was a great idea for me, my sister, my father, and my mother to bond. So that's exactly what happened. We rented a cabin for a few days. We took off school on Friday to get a head start on getting there, which I had no issue with. We got there and it was sure cold. Well, it was almost December, so I guess it made sense that it was so cold. Anyway, we got all set up and decided where we would all sleep. We ate dinner, and then we all got set up for bed, and were thinking about what we would do tomorrow. We got there kind of late, so we couldn't do too much on the first day. That night, though, I heard noises outside. It sounded kind of like footsteps. I looked out the window and saw nothing of note, so I figured it must have been an animal or something. I tried my very best to go back to sleep, and somewhere around 15 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, though, I made sure to wake my sister up. She was about 11 at the time, and she heard it as well. We both walked over to the window and saw something out there. We weren't quite sure what it was. We decided it was best for it not to see us, so we went back to sleep. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and so did my sister. But when we eventually woke up, my mother was inside making breakfast, and my father was outside. I asked my mom if I could go outside with my dad, and she told me sure, while my sister stayed inside and waited for her breakfast. I walked outside and my father was talking to some man. A short, chubby man. He had a shaved head and was wearing a veteran cap. He looked really nervous too for some reason. He was sweating a lot, even though it was freezing outside. I walked over to him and my father looked at me and said, "Oh, this is my son," and told him my name. The man looked at me and said, "Nice to meet you, kid. My name's Patrick." He smiled and looked at me. I smiled and greeted him back. It may have been rude at the time, but I was just a kid. And I asked him, "You look kinda scared. Are you alright?" He kind of coughed and replied, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just went through shell shock. I'm a veteran," he said, as I couldn't tell already with the cap he was wearing. He seemed rather normal at the time. My father seemed to really like this guy, and I liked him at first too. He told my father he had also rented a cabin with his family, and that they were really close to us, and he decided to introduce himself. My father invited him inside for breakfast and he stayed, and it was seemingly normal. I went outside to play after that with my father and Patrick. While outside, I fell and scraped my knee and started crying. My father was inside at the time, a bad time for him to be inside. My mother was calling for him, and he ran inside while I was out there with Patrick. Patrick ran over to me and told me to come to his cabin, because he had band-aids. I agreed and went with him. I wasn't a very smart kid. I went with Patrick. We talked about what I liked doing, and I told him about video games that I played and stuff like that. Then, things got weird. He asked me what shoe size I was and how old I am. I didn't know what my shoe size was. I told him, but I told him my age. He just kind of chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Good to know." Also, his cabin was nowhere near ours. It was way back. It took about 20 to 25 minutes to walk there. I was tired and there was no point in getting a Band-Aid anymore, but I still decided to keep going since I had walked so long. We entered the cabin, and he told me to go in first, so I did. As soon as I walked in, I realized something. There was nobody in there. No family. I asked him where his family was, and he didn't answer, pretending like he didn't hear. He locked the door. I then kind of got frightened. He told me, "I'll be right back with a Band-Aid, kiddo." He walked into the kitchen and pulled one out of somewhere, and then walked back and told me to have a seat and he'd put it on. I sat down and he put it on me. He also held my leg in his other hand and rubbed it down and told me, "You're rather muscular, kid. I like that." I got kind of scared and immediately stood up. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him nothing, and that my leg was feeling much better. I then thought my parents must be worried sick, and I should hurry back. He insisted that I stay longer and ate there. I didn't want to, but I was alone, and if I ran, I don't think I could have found my way back to the cabin. The door was locked too, so I just agreed and decided to eat with him and get it over with fast. He asked how much I weighed, and I guessed around 73 pounds. He then had a smile across his face. He nodded and said, "Perfect weight." I asked him why it was perfect weight. He just kept smiling. I was really weirded out and asked him if I could go. He said no, and that things were just getting started, and I shouldn't miss out on the fun. He had such a weird tone when he said that. I then heard a big bang come from the bedroom. It was a closed door. Patrick stood up and looked kind of angry. He walked into the room and shut the door behind him. I then heard him yelling, "Did I freaking tell you that you could move? No, so stay the hell where you are. I have company." Or something like that. He then walked out with a smile on his face and shut the door slowly. Sorry about that. It was just my wife. She was really sick and not allowed to be near visitors today. He was smiling while saying that. I wanted to go. I then looked around the room and noticed there were clothes everywhere, and it was really messy. He must have been living out of here. At that moment, his wife walked out of the room. "I'm hungry," she said. He looked pissed. "Get back in there," he said. His wife was extremely pale and looked like she had been crying a lot. She was sniffling and had red circles around her eyes. She looked at me, then walked back in the room. I asked him where his kids were. He didn't answer. He told me he had kids' clothes that he wanted me to try on. That was the last straw. I had to get out of this situation, but I didn't know how to. I started crying and then he hugged me. He told me, "It'll be okay, little one. Nothing is going to happen. Just try on these clothes." He walked in the back room. I thought that was the perfect time for me to leave. I unlocked his door and tried to leave as quietly as I could. I didn't care if I got lost anymore. I didn't want to take the chances with Patrick, if that was even his name. I had a feeling that he had been lying. He lied about having kids, who knows what else. I was in the woods trying to find my way back. I was still close to his house, close enough to hear shouting. I heard him yelling stuff to his wife. Things along the lines of, "Where the F did I go?" and "I knew I shouldn't have left him alone." Stuff like that. I could have sworn I heard him call her a bunch of names that I don't want to repeat. Then it happened. I stopped in my tracks. I heard footsteps. I went and hid behind a tree and looked in his direction. He was outside and he seemed to be looking for me. I was far enough away to where I could barely see him, but I could tell he was looking for something. He then stepped out into the forest and I heard him shouting, "Hey kid, it's okay, you can come back now. You don't have to try on the clothes. I have toys in the back of my cabin. If you want to come play with them, just come back." I then ran. I ran as fast as I could in a straight line in hopes I would find my family. I was running away and I thought I heard shouting, but I didn't stop to hear it. Then, after about an hour of running, I saw a cabin. My cabin. I ran to it. My father was outside looking around for me. I ran up to him crying and told him Patrick wasn't a good guy, and that he really was weird, and he was touching my legs and stuff. My father immediately called the person he rented the cabin from, and he said that nobody had rented that cabin. My father looked at me and told me to never follow any stranger ever again. We immediately left that day and asked for a refund for the next day. The guy renting them out apologized. The man, having the cabin rentals, called the police, and the police went back there and checked the cabin, and there was nobody there, not even his wife. His clothes and belongings were still there, is what they told us. Nothing really happened after that. They asked questions and left. They never called us or told us anything about him ever again. Patrick most likely wasn't his real name, and he probably wasn't a veteran. I just want to know what happened to him and his wife, and how he even got a wife in the first place, and how and why he lived in that cabin. He seemed to have been living there for a while. I guess he left because he figured the police would be coming after him because he didn't rent the cabin. So many questions that will likely never get answered. I'm just glad that it's all over.
My Unexplained
Paranormal Encounter by Creepiest Son.
I've heard many paranormal stories, and there's always a little voice of doubt in terms of the storyteller's authenticity. But while these events didn't happen to me, they did happen to someone I was very close with, and contain a few elements of corroboration. It's important for me to get a feeling for honesty when listening to a story that defies scientific belief. So, for what it's worth, this is an honest account. First, a little backstory. Miv was a fascinating woman. She was one of my best friends, which is a little odd because I met her when I was about 18 years old, and she was in her middle ages. I was a young guy into motorcycles and rock music. I played guitar and was into horror movies and working out. As a contrast, she was short, dumpy, had thin greasy hair, a walking stick, and wore thick bottle-rimmed glasses. She was never without a cigarette in her hand, and her ashtray was always full. However, she was an unbelievable, astute, and wise woman, to the point where she was like a wise old oracle to me and my hippie friends. There was never a personal problem she could not fix with a few gentle words. I would often go to her tall, slightly creepy Victorian terrace house, and we would sit in her favorite room and chat philosophically. The air full of smoke and surrounded by dusty antiques and the odd stuffed bird. Her husband was, by all accounts, a wretched man. His nickname, by all, was the Wizard. Their house was pretty much all wood floors, narrow but tall. He wore an orthopedic shoe, known colloquially as a club foot. You'd hear him coming and clomping down the wood stairs from a mile away. As his nickname suggested, he had long gray hair and a little goatee that resembled a stereotypical devil. He always wore a gray suit and had wild, staring eyes. He didn't seem altogether and right in his mind. That was apparent during any conversation you would have with him. I don't mean he was like crazy, more like he was old, significantly older than Miv, and his mind was just a little aged. When he was younger, he also gained a reputation for black magic. One brief account I heard was that there was a black magic circle known for their dark deeds, something like the Golden Dawn or something like that. Well, they wouldn't let him join because he was too dark. Suffice to say, he was probably into summoning things. Anyway, over the years before Miv died, we became very close, and I heard all kind of cool stories. The story I'm about to recount is, I guess, not so cool. At least not for her. But it's an interesting one. Years ago, when she and her husband were living in South Wales in the UK, they lived in a similar house to the one that I knew that she lived in. A tall, slightly spooky, aren't they all, Victorian terrace house. These houses were usually 3 stories, maybe a basement. I've lived in one myself, and they're inherently spooky, which kind of sets the tone. At the time, Miv and the Wizard had just had their first child, who would grow up to become one of my best friends about 24 years later. She had also, not too terribly long ago, come out of a brief stint in a nun's convent, so she was very religious. With that came certain beliefs and attitudes which would soon be very much tested to breaking points. I'm not able to be exact with the timeline here, but Miv told me that she started hearing voices, distant at first, in the house, when no one was around. As if often the case in many of these stories, she shrugged it off and ignored it as best she could. But then the voices started to address her directly. Now at this stage, she recalls being very worried that she was in fact unwell, and her biggest fear was that her son would get taken away from her due to her inability to take care of him. So she told no one. The voices got worse and eventually would start saying things like, "We're going to drive you mad," and she would say things like that, and so forth. If that wasn't enough, though, she would soon start to see a dark, shadowy figure at the top of the stairs. She told me that it would always appear in such a way that as you turned to look to see if there was something there, you'd almost stumble at the top of these steps and fall to your death. Still, she refused to talk about it. In her mind, and with her religious beliefs, there was no room for ghosts to exist, so it was a subjective phenomenon, and she was indeed losing her marbles. In this house, they had a cleaner. The cleaner would always leave the front door wide open when she was cleaning the stairs and the hall. Miv assumed it was to get fresh air, maybe to help dry the floor. One day, when it was cold, Miv questioned her. "Why do you keep that door open? It's so cold." Her response changed Miv's life at this point. She said, "It's so if that dark thing at the top of the stairs comes for me, I can get out of here right quickly." Again, bear in mind that Miv had not told anyone about this phenomenon. One day, she had a friend over. The friend was a big, burly, tough woman who stood no nonsense. She didn't believe in any of this supernatural rubbish and was not afraid of ghosts. After sitting in their living room and this lady giving Miv something of telling her off for being so silly and superstitious, the lady got up to go to the bathroom. She came back a moment later, her face white. "You okay?" said Miv. "Can you come with me?" replied the lady. "Because you don't know where the bathroom is?" "No, because I'm not going up there on my own with that dark shadow." Another story shared with me was that Miv was bathing her son in the upstairs bathroom when someone knocked on the front door to the house. She yelled down to them, and it turned out to be a friend, so she shouted for him to come up and that she was in the bathroom. She heard him walk up the stairs. He then suddenly broke into a sprint, came running into the bathroom, threw his arms around Miv, and clung to her like a baby, terrified of what he had just seen. Eventually, it all came to a head when this entity started to entice her into something more sinister. She recalls hearing the voices beckoning her upstairs to the dark top-floor bedroom. The weird thing here, and what's hard to explain, if only because I don't quite understand it, is that she felt compelled to obey. It got her up the stairs. She would stop. She would resist, and it would gently insist that she continues upward. And again, she would obey against her will. This happened all the way until she got to the bedroom with the lights out. If I recall correctly, the thing asked her to turn the lights out, and she at first said no. But again, it insisted. This is crazy, I know. It eventually got her to lie down on the bed. Laying there in the dark, she then described how this entity began to assert itself onto and into her body. She described it like assault, but through her pores, if that makes any sense. She began an internal struggle at this stage, and in that struggle was able to draw some willpower to call out the name of Jesus or something like that. I forgot whether she said a small prayer, but some form of religious statement, and the thing went away instantly. I'm sure there are many other anecdotes. The other friends in our circle know of these stories too and have probably heard their own tales. So I may be missing a few key pieces. All I know is that they shortly moved out of that house. Now, one thing that does stand out as interesting, after discussing the story with a mutual friend who knew Miv for years before I met her, he told me that she'd also said this to him, but around that time that they left the house for good, she saw the wizard kneeling and burying something, and it was thought that he was doing something. Whatever he was doing, though, resembled a closing ceremony for when someone summons a demon. I know some of this won't make any sense, and I don't really expect it to. Why would you stay married to someone that evil, though? I asked myself that question. In fact, you know something? I asked her that same question at least once. She took a long drag on her cigarette, gave a long, slow shrug as she exhaled, and said something about feeling sorry for him. The whole dynamic will have me scratching my head. Miv was incredibly wise in some ways, and yet nonsensical in other ways, but there seemed to be more to that family story than meets the eye. Eventually they would have a daughter, who was born physically and mentally disabled. The daughter is only surviving family of the member now. My friend, her son, died of cancer about 7 years after I met both him and his mother. The wizard died around that same time too, and Miv, heartbroken over the death of her son, died just 2 years after we buried him. She used to say, "When I die, I'm going to haunt you," in her usual playful way. Eyes twinkling, taking a drag of a cigarette. She meant to come back and give me a clue about the other side. After attending her son's funeral, I was walking on the waterfront of my hometown. I was thinking about them both, and I felt tearful. I sat on the sea wall and spoke to her. I asked her why she didn't come to me to show me any evidence of the other side. I concluded, well, maybe she tried, but I can't see it. Maybe I can only see what I can only see. I stood up to walk away, and something compelled me, I don't know what or why, to look down where I was sitting. There, etched into the very slab of concrete I was sitting on, was the first, initial, and the last name of her son, who we had buried 2 days before.
Something in the Cemetery by Chantel. My friend and I had been hanging with some friends at their house in a neighborhood called the Round Valley. Around 2 a.m., my friend Sasha and I left Jacob's house to go walk home. Jacob's house is located directly behind this creepy old cemetery, separated by a fence to their property, then the dirt road and another fence outlining the graveyard. So when we walk home, we always jump the cemetery fence and walk through because it's quicker, and then we walk to the main road back to my place for hers. I live down Sapphire Road and Sasha lives down Emerald off Sapphire. We jump the fence as usual and begin walking. And as we are walking, we see something black and huge run past us through our side vision and hear the faint cackling of leaves and dirt being kicked up. It was only very slight, but it was just enough for us to both notice and stop and look at each other. We just thought maybe it was our thoughts getting to us, and keeping in mind, as I'm writing, this happened 2 months ago. We are both sound of mind and we are not and never have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I am almost 17 and she just turned 16, and we're not the kind of girls who get scared at little things like that, and like I said, we walk through here all the time. It takes quite a bit to scare us. So we clasped our hands together and kept walking. We walked out of the cemetery, and as soon as we were on the pavement, we saw something moving in the distance. We kept walking, and as we got near, we began to be able to see glowing red eyes. They were very big and luminous. There was no moon this night, just the light from the cemetery, and they were high, very high off the ground, probably 8 to 10 feet high. We stopped and it was getting closer. Its eyes slowly went up and down as it was taking long strides. We began to see the outline of the figure. It was very dark, it had fur, and a very wolf-like shaped face, with long pointed ears, with big red eyes, and like I said, it was very tall. We were so scared, we were shaking and could barely move at this point. What we could make out was that the figure was running on 2 legs, with a long body strapping by. It looked very strong, similar to how bodybuilders would look. We looked to our right and left for a way to run, and we saw a person's pasture, a high fence. But we'd always seen horses in there, so we looked at each other, nodded, and ran. We jumped over that fence. Sasha jumped down on the other side, and before I jumped down, I looked, and the creature looked as though it was running on all 4s. Now, eyes lowered to the ground. Now that it was down on all 4 legs, it was approaching much faster, and I yelped, launching out the fence, grabbing Sasha's hand, and ran with everything we were worth. We ran completely across the pasture and jumped a second fence. We ran back to Sasha's house, went inside, and caught our breath. We have yet to see the creature again, but we haven't gone anywhere alone at night without a guy or something to protect us. Usually we're on my quad as well now. We've seen dark figures running in our side vision multiple times before, but never seeing the red eyes and being followed like that. However, what I do know is that I might have saw a werewolf or some sort of skinwalker. We do live in Round Valley area in the Payson, Arizona area, and I have heard of a ton of different stories of skinwalkers here. The Unseen Sight of a Web by Jack. Before I start writing, I want to apologize for my bad grammar. I'm terrified and writing fast. Almost about a week ago, I watched videos about the different layers of the internet, such as the front web, which everyone uses, and the dark web, which takes some time to get into, etc. Well, I wanted to see how far it goes. I work with computers and code, so I know my way around them. To a certain point of hacking and breaking down, it really just comes with repetitive codes and passwords that seem to never really end. But now I work from home and have plenty of extra time on my hands, so I keep going. Finally, after multiple endless nights, I go to a blank screen with a timer counting down. Just a blank white screen with the timer counting down from 1000. I waited for it to hit 0. When it finally did, there was a message with an answer box underneath. The question read, "Why?" I was confused, and it didn't seem to work, no matter what I put in, until I wrote research. The page buffered and brought me to some sort of website. It was an ugly yellow background with red smoky faces all over it in weird patterns. Weird, I know. I tried clicking on the middle of my screen, and it took me to a video. There is a video of 3 men walking through a strange-looking woods at night, and they each have a very dim flashlight. I watched this for probably 20 minutes, but nothing happened. So I continued watching these videos, and they got consistently stranger. One of a man was swimming in what looked to be water, but it was highly thick. Swimming next to him was a skinny, glowing fish. Another video was on a head cam, running through what looked to be some sort of abandoned hotel. They were chasing some sort of tall, pale humanoid creature. Eventually the beast got lost and the man started hyperventilating. The video ended there, but the longer I watched these videos, the worse they got. There was a 10-minute long video of a wall with blood oozing from the cracks, and a starved-looking man being fed a strange giant hairless dog. It was hard to watch. At the top right of my screen, I saw a smiley face. It was different from everything else. The color was just off. When I clicked on it instead of a video, it gave a question. Ready for the second layer? And then there are 2 buttons, yes and no. I didn't know what to do. Eventually, my curiosity took over. I clicked yes, and it took me to a similar page. There were 4 heads on there, and instead of smoky red faces, they were replaced with white pictures of people's faces. 4 looks in a circle. I clicked on the first. I had no idea what was about to happen. It was a creature, but I can't for my life describe it. It moved in ways that weren't possible. There were colors I had never seen before, and noises my ears couldn't comprehend. It put a feeling of overwhelming dread and anxiety into my body. I grabbed the laptop on my desk in my backyard, stomped it, smashed it until there was nothing left, no way it could be tracked. Eventually, I had to leave my room to shop for food. In their supermarket, I swear I was followed by tall, slim people. I don't know if I should call them people. They were shiny and pitch black skin with no face. No one else could see them. And maybe I'm just paranoid. I'm hiding in my room again. I can see the people outside my house passing by my windows as I write this. I don't know what I did, what I found, but I'm terrified. And I wanted to write into the show to let people know there are some strange and downright creepy things on the internet, and they don't want you to know about it.
I'm a 24-year-old male living in the Philippines. The story I wanted to share with you is not exactly my own, but was told to me by my father some years ago. The events transpired when I was only about a year old. Back then, my family lived in a rural area where everyone knew everyone. We also had a ton of relatives nearby, living in the same group of neighborhoods. One day, my dad was outside in the backyard watering plants. He was minding his own business when he suddenly noticed an unusually large black bird perched in an old tree. The branches of that tree hung low, so my dad got a much better look at the bird than I'm sure he wanted to. He did not think anything of it at first, but he soon noticed that the bird's eyes were a deep red. Not glowing or anything like that, but more like they were severely bloodshot. He said the bird just sat there, staring at him, returning my father's ponderous gaze just as intently as he watched it. My dad was unsettled, but soon got back to his work. He got done watering and went inside. A few hours later, sometime during the night, Dad went back outside to do some more chores in the yard. Now, the way our houses were set up, there was a sort of alleyway with a fence that separated our house from the one next door. My dad was finishing up when he caught a glimpse of something small scurrying across the alleyway, making a splash in a puddle of water. Since he had a pet turtle at the time, a red-eared slider, my dad thought maybe the turtle got out of his tank and somehow was trying to run off. He walked over to the dark alley, and upon closer inspection, he found the culprit. Oddly, what he found there was a large crab of some kind. It was not a common sight in my area. The crab was the size of a dinner plate. The strangest part was that in the low light coming from the back of our house, my dad could see the crab's eyes. They were that same deep blood-red color of the blackbird he had seen earlier. The crab stopped in its tracks and stared him down. That same intense glare from his encounter with the large bird. He quickly dropped what he was doing and went back inside the house, admittedly creeped out by yet another bizarre animal sighting. The next day, my dad went to speak to the neighborhood elders about what he had seen. They told him it was an aswang, so, if you did not know, Stories of Aswang are all over the Philippines, especially out in the rural areas. Up to 80% of the people here actually believe in this. They are basically the Philippines' equivalent to vampires of Western folklore in terms of mythology. They are said to be shapeshifters who have a taste for human and animal entrails, but their most sought-after delicacy is the flesh of an unborn child. The legends have it that the Aswang would crawl around on rooftops at night, searching for pregnant women. When it found one, it would settle above the expectant mother as she slept, winding its freakishly long, prehensile tongue into her room by some opening in her roof, and suck the baby from her very womb. As it happened, my mother was pregnant with my little sister. One of the elders claimed he knew the Aswang had paid a visit to our house. I do not know how he would know this information, but he insisted that this Aswang was not trying to eat my sister. Rather, he said, it simply liked being around pregnant women because it finds their aroma to be somehow intoxicating. My dad said, although it was still creepy, he was a bit relieved that he was not dealing with a creature that wanted to harm his family. My sister was born without any problems, and we never heard from that creature again as far as I know. This is not an awfully long story at all, and I cannot stress enough that I have not been the same since. No exaggeration, just a disclaimer. I'm not that big on cryptids, and did not really believe in them until one night. My brother and I were in the SUV cruising through a rural area of Wisconsin, and headed back to our dad's house. We turned off a country highway to a back road near a bar I used to work at. Excited to smoke the weed we had just bought, we were not really concerned with much else besides getting home, smoking, and listening to our hillbilly music. We came to a point in the road where there are 3 forks, and as cliché as it sounds, it came from nowhere. In an instant, I stomped on the brakes. About 40 feet northeast of us, over a chopped cornfield, was a ball of light the size of an average house, seated above a rectangular light, the size of a semi and a trailer. We sat still, the vehicle still running. We both stared at it for what felt like forever. I was frozen, and my brother eventually spoke up and yelled to go. I just could not move. I have never ever been so frozen in my life. A couple of seconds, maybe even a minute or so goes by, I have no idea, and eventually I'm hearing, "Go! Go! Leave! Let's go!" Still, I was stiff. In a much more calm but obviously unsettled voice, through tears, he said, "Cody, hit the gas, please. We have to leave." The light seemed to get brighter simultaneously with the request. All I remember was crying and silently hitting the gas. My eyes turned to the road and I floored it. We made the approximately 40-yard dash around the left in the road, and in the same instant we started going straight. The light was over top of us, and I swear I could see what looked like humanoid figures all around us. My brother started crying hysterically. As soon as it was there, it flashed off to our left, seemingly shrunk and disappeared. All the figures also disappeared. We both cried silently on the way home. I did not believe in cryptids or aliens or whatever until this instance. I would absolutely love to hear if anyone has had any similar experiences. I really wanted to share this because I was a hardcore skeptic until this night. If you share this, thank you a million times, and keep up the show. I really enjoy it. I have an even shorter story if it interests you at all. Good evening, Swamp Dweller. I am an Inuk man from northern Canada, and I wanted to tell you about the time in my younger days when I believe our hunting party faced off with an Izarak, an evil being that takes the shape of a caribou. I am an old man now, and this story takes place many years ago, in what is now the territory of Nunavut, Canada. In those days, many of us Inuit still lived in the traditional ways of hunting, fishing, and living from what the land gave us before we were forced into communities by the Canadian government and RCMP. In winter, we traveled far from our homes to hunt the seals and great caribou herds from which we took our meat and furs. This story takes place during one of these trips that are now long gone. Myself, my brother, an elder, and another man set out from our houses to track the caribou herds. Snowmobiles were only new back then, and only one man had one. The rest of us traveled by dog sled. We had enough supplies for 2 weeks loaded on our sleds, as well as several hunting spears and 3 World War II era rifles. This was in the late 1960s, so they were plentiful in those times. After a 3-day-long trip, we managed to track the herd and made our snow houses for the night. As the sun came up the next morning, we set up our rifles on a ridge overlooking the herd, and not long after my brother spied a beautiful fat male among the others. We quickly drew a bead on several other caribou and open fired. Within a few minutes there were 7 dead animals waiting for us on the snow. We made quick work skinning and gutting the first 6, but immediately upon looking at the 7th we knew something was not quite right. Its fur was ragged. Its eyes were not normal. They looked like that of a man, not a caribou. As my brother stuck his knife into the animal, its eyes jerked to the side and stared directly at him. We jumped back but quickly passed it off as a death reflex. But when the animal was opened, we were met with horror. Its meat was black and festering. The smell was so bad we were nearly made sick. The elder knew immediately that something was terribly wrong, and the decision was made to douse the carcass in gas and burn it. As we rode away with our kills, we began to get a very uneasy feeling, so we stopped for a minute and let the dogs rest. As we looked back, we noticed something moving on the far hill, and we were shocked when we looked back at it with binoculars. The caribou we thought was burned was slowly trotting behind us. The bullet wound was now a dark brown stain, and those human-like eyes were staring right through the glass at us. We immediately hitched the dogs and rode as fast as we could. We traveled several miles the opposite direction over the sea ice to hide our trail and keep it from finding our camp. As darkness came, we finally lost the creature in the snow. All that night, 2 of us stayed awake with guns at the ready. We cut our trip short and fled back to town at first light. The elders blessed us and our meat to ward off any bad magic the Izarak may have brought on us. This spirit takes on the shape of a caribou and is said to kill hunters and kidnap children. There have been many, many other memorable hunting trips in my long life, but this one stands out to me the clearest. Growing up, I spent time living in a house in Mapleton, Utah. It was pretty haunted in my opinion, but I also think there were some unknown creatures running around as well. A lot of activity occurred in that house on a constant basis. Things like hearing all the dishes breaking and the cupboard slamming shut, yet, if you went into the kitchen, everything was seemingly intact. I believe the best stories, though, would come from my older brother, Kevin. One of those stories would begin with him sleeping downstairs. Suddenly, he would be awoken, but he felt paralyzed. Before his eyes was a white creature unlike anything he had ever seen before. Its hands were nailed down to the ceiling, along with its feet also being nailed. The creature looked kind of like a naked human being, but very, very wrong and very, very contorted. All the limbs looked elongated, too long for humans, and nearly all looked dislocated. The spine protruded from its back. The skin was pale but nearly like leather. The creature began to turn its head toward him. It turned its head completely backward to look at him. There were no facial features at all. Suddenly, its jaw began to move, and it looked as though the mouth had been shred open to allow the jaw to even move. But the jaw began to look as though it was dislocated as it eased its head and opened its jaw toward him, as though it was trying to consume him. He quickly rolled off the bed and ran to the door, taking one look back before taking off. It began to twist its neck further to look at him and watch where he was going. He ran off upstairs to tell our mother. He did not see it again that night. But the second time he saw it, it was sitting in his closet in a fetal position, simply watching. He never slept in that room again. The strangest part about the story is, when I was sleeping in the living room next to it, I had a dream about some weird people in my bed who have died. They were warning me that bodies had been buried within the walls, and we needed to leave the house. I always think about this when I remember this house, because I encountered this creature myself before I knew he did. I thought that maybe it was just a hallucination, or maybe some sort of ghost. But now, I'm starting to think it was an eerie creature that was living in our house somewhere, or maybe it was some sort of interdimensional being. Hello. I'd prefer to keep my name private, as I do not wish to be identified in fear of being ridiculed. My story is just a compilation of small things happening that lead up to a possible creature sighting. It will give you some background, so that you can get a better idea of my situation. I am a 19-year-old girl, and I live in Indiana with my grandparents and brother. We are all nature lovers, and my grandfather is a zoologist. I take after him, and we enjoy identifying bird calls while out on hikes or sitting in the backyard. Now, we don't quite live in the middle of nowhere, but we are not exactly in the big city either. We live in one of two subdivisions, the second one behind us. For the most part, we are surrounded by cornfields and little patches of forest between them. There is enough forest to support small herds of deer, raccoons, possum, skunk, owls, and coyotes. Behind our house is a pond that is about 160 feet long and probably 50 feet across. Behind the pond is a row of spruce trees which separates our subdivision from the other. Now, the people who own the pond keep it stocked with fish: bluegill, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, and a couple of catfish. My window is one of the ones facing the pond. Now that you know all that, the real story can start. It was early in the morning, sometime around 4 a.m., and for some reason my dog woke me up. He wanted to be let out of my room. Confused but not going to argue with him, I let him out and he goes to the bed with my grandparents. I shut my door and lay back down to go to sleep when suddenly I hear a noise. It sounded almost like a mourning dove, but it was still pitch black outside. Doves should not be awake at this time. As I slowly looked out the window, the noise seemingly stopped. This continued for a good 45 minutes or so. Every time I sat up to look out the window, the noise stopped again. This happened every night for a few days. Each time the noise would startle my dog, and he would wake me up so he could leave. Soon after the noise started, we found a decapitated baby bunny on our doormat. Then 2 days later, there was another dead one. They had no bites or scratches on them. They were just missing their heads. For a whole week, everything seemed to have stopped. We found a dead fish, a 14, maybe even 15-inch catfish that had been pulled up onto shore. Just like with the 2 bunnies, 2 weeks later, another one was found in the same condition, untouched except for a missing head. Once again, everything was normal, and once again, it did not last. I was sitting on the back porch watching some ducks on the pond when suddenly, one was pulled under the water. It was not a dive. It went straight down like a rock. The other ducks flew off in a panic. The duck resurfaced and flew off to join the others. Another time, the duck was not so lucky. It got pulled under and never came back up. Even though I sat there waiting for an hour, staring at the pond, nothing ever happened. As the weeks continued, the fish and frog population shrank more and more, and the ducks no longer visited our pond. One night in mid-July, I was up late, doing some reading to help calm my mind, when suddenly I hear an unfamiliar sound. Now keep in mind, my grandpa is a zoologist, so I have learned what different animals sound like. This was undoubtedly the same sound I heard earlier in the year, but it was louder and much clearer. If you have ever heard a mourning dove, you know what its song pattern is like. What I was hearing almost matched this pattern exactly, but it sounded more like if you mashed together a dog bark and a leopard frog croak. I apologize for the bad description, but that is the best way to describe it. I am almost positive it was trying to mimic a dove. The call was scratchy, and it sounded like it was stuck on repeat. Since then, whenever I am home alone, I hear that call. But just before anyone gets home, the sound stops. I told my grandparents and brother, but they have never, ever heard it. And subsequently, they do not believe me. They just say that I'm paranoid from listening to the stories on your channel. But I don't think that's the case. I've been trying to convince my girlfriend to tell people about this for a while now, but she keeps putting it off. I asked her if I could just share this story on this show. As it's her story, I find it fascinating considering I'm obsessed with cryptids and stuff. She said I could, so here goes. So for some time I was studying at a university in England. While there, I met my girlfriend who lived local to the city. I would go back home in Wales for the first 2 years of uni during Christmas, Easter, and summer breaks. The summer was usually a big long break, and I would use it for work at my part-time job to earn money to spend on nights out for my following year of uni. I don't drive, and at the time, I was not getting along with her family, so I did not like going to hers. So every other weekend I had off work, my girlfriend would drive down to Wales and spend some time over the weekend with me. So, during the summer between my first and second year, she had to leave early. She ended up taking a different route home as I had a night shift coming up. She agreed to drive me to my night shift to save me getting the bus, despite it taking her out of her way, and meaning she had to take a different route home. After dropping me off, she was driving along. Anyone who knows Wales knows that it's predominantly rural, country roads, with the odd town or village scattered about. She saw a creature run across the road. She slammed on her brakes, at first thinking it was a dog or a cat. But she said looking at it, it did not look like either. She said it was huge, like the size of a full-grown Great Dane, and it had no fur. She described it as having large paws, bigger than that of any wildlife in the area. It also had no fur, like I said. She said it moved in a way that she said seemed unusual and unnatural, like its limbs were bent but not straightening out while it ran, although this could have been a trick of the light, as it was very dark. The area this was in was near the village of Trelawned, on one of the country roads just off from the garage. I've asked her to describe the creature. She's drawn it a few times, but basically describes it as looking like an enormous hairless fossa. She's a zoologist too, so I expect her to recognize wild animals, especially since all we really have are red foxes, badgers, and a few loose ferrets that have escaped from farms. She's driven that route so many times since then, both with and without me, and I've tried to spot it, but with no avail. I even got her a dash cam, and she must have driven that route repeatedly over and over again, but we've not had any luck. While the whole thing seems unlikely, and that maybe it was a trick of the light or something like that, I believe her, partly due to her stubborn conviction that there was no trick of the light, and what she saw was legit. She seems to cling on to this with such conviction that I find it hard to doubt. I didn't see it myself, I only know what I was told, but I thought it would be an interesting story regardless.